Alright, so in this chapter, we're going to be looking at our splash and foam sim that we're going to be doing. In the previous chapter, I went ahead and did this higher res simulation, so we'll go ahead and look at that right now. Let's load up. Alright, so we have about, let's see how many particles we have here. About 2 million-ish. And you can see here, let me play this through, it's a little bit slow. Let's go to a frame here of the head. We get a nice detail now and all that. So it's really cool. We get all this splash and stuff. And 2 million particles isn't very much to actually use. We'd probably go up to about 10 million or so. We'd let this run overnight and it would look really, really awesome. But you know, for the purposes of this class, we're going to be doing just the just this here. So now the next step of this, what we're going to have to do is get this splash and foam stuff set up, and it's relatively pretty easy to set up right off the bat to make this to work, right? So let's go ahead and do that. Up here to our Hybrido menu. Let's add a splash and foam. We have a bunch of other stuff here we can add, like the wet and foam, just the splash. We just want to do splash. The wet emitter, and this is something we're not really going to touch. Essentially what this does is it makes particles on the surface of an object once it's detected in the Hybrido fluid filled there. Then we have just foam, waterline. This is kind of interesting. This will actually make a foam around the edge of an object. This is pretty cool for like boats and like you have something like bouncing in the water or something in the ocean. So we'll just go ahead though and make this splash and foam. And oh, there's a fun bug there. There we go. Oh yeah, okay, there we go. It's a little hiccup there in the video card thing here in the graph editor, or relationship editor, I mean. So we get this guy, let's go ahead and connect it. Now before, remember we went over to the simulation tab and we have just our flip. Now we want to put this thing onto cache. So right now, it's not, when we start simming this, it's going to be pulling the cache data from here and not, and just simming this. So that way, we're not overwriting our sim. So let's go ahead and, I'm just going to reset this real quick so I have this up here. So when you make your splash and foam guy here, it makes this little box. And basically, this is saying, wherever this box is at, splash and foam will be created at. It can go outside the box, and it's totally cool, but it's only in this domain where it will be made. Actually, I'm gonna populate this again real quick. Just go to 120, so we know where this water is at and where we need to put this this guy. So we want it just on the very, very top here. We'll do it all over. You can actually get pretty sophisticated with this and make a bunch of little ones. Really get this directable fluid splash and stuff like that if you want. But we're just going to kind of do an overall thing here. Let's go ahead and the water comes up pretty high. We want to see where this water comes up at. Let's go ahead and make this a little higher. Bring this up. See here, that's pretty good. Yep. Okay. Let's go and make this a little bit bigger here. And then move it over a little bigger. Just gonna make it almost as big as the where the water is at. It's down to the tad. Okay. And okay. So we're pretty much almost good to go to even start doing this. Right now, if we redo this, the splash and foam will be created, but there will be no gravity or anything like that. So what we can do here is we'll just grab our same gravity and kill volume. And we'll leave the drag alone for now. But these emitters, extra emitters, need their own forces outside of the Hybrido domain. So go ahead, let's go ahead and reset this guy. And the splash and foam sim goes extremely a lot faster because basically it's dumb particles or ballistic particles instead of fluid particles. So let's go ahead and look at the settings real quick. We'll I'll go over these a little bit more in depth here in a second, but we'll leave everything almost at default. The only thing I'm going to change here is the emission rate. Instead of 30,000, let's put 50,000 so we can see some. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and save this file real quick, and I won't pause it this time because it should be pretty quick, so we'll go ahead and simulate this. The only thing that takes time really in the simulation stuff is writing the files and reading that cache. So it's pretty quick. So right now we got 0 particles. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and pause this and then come back and see what we have. Okay, so let's see what we have here. Let's go ahead and populate the timeline. I'm going to do about 50 frames on this guy. So let's see. Okay, so we're starting to see some foam here. I'm going to go ahead and just come into this flip cache. I'm going to go ahead and hide it. So I can make a layer for it real quick. Okay, almost put up and hide that filter. So we're getting some splash, or some splash here from this. Not too much. Yeah, and also, I don't know if you noticed, I didn't even add the geo into the deflectors for this either. Sometimes you don't even have to do that. For this shot, we don't really need to do that. If it were like a boat going through the water, then you probably want to do that. This is only about 8 particles, we're at 15,000 or something. Yeah, it's just a tiny bit. So we really want to exploit the particle count, what we can get out of this, because we can get millions and millions of particles out of this pretty quickly. So let's go ahead and change some of these settings and go over what these settings mean exactly. So we have this emission rate. So the emission rate, it's basically what it means, the emission rate of the particles. So it's like 50,000 per, I think it's over a frame, tries to get 50,000 over a certain amount of time, I believe. And there's a couple ways to increase the emission. It doesn't say in here, this emission rate and the position variation. These two actually control how many particles we get here. So if you come to the position variation, this also generates particles, or shifts the variation position of the particles, right? So, but it also comes in here, you press F1. You can read that there, but it basically says can be also effectively to use to increase the splash particles. Now, if you do a really high position variation, I'm going to go ahead and show you really quickly here. Let's turn this down about 10,000. And we'll put this up to, this is like a normalized value, so it goes up to 1, I believe. Let me just double check. No, it isn't actually. It's a value. So let's go ahead and just put this to, let's say 1 for now. Go ahead and reset this, and I'll let this simulate here pretty quickly, and then I will be right back. Pause this. Okay, so let's go ahead and have a look. I was watching the sim, and it's pretty amazing how much this will change the particle count, and I lowered this by 5 times as much and raised this for about 10 times as much, so I guess that kind of makes sense. But let's go ahead and check it out. So let's go to frame 20 here. You can get up to about 5 million particles, I believe, in just a few minutes. Yeah, you got 500,000 right here. It's still loading here. Yeah. So also the position variation, you can see it's huge. There's a massive amount there of just jittering, which is good and bad. I mean, for this we don't really need this sort of look. So I'm going to go ahead and just redo this and redo some of the settings here. So I'm going to reset this. So, okay, let's go put this back down to say even 0.15, and we'll raise this to 100,000 for now. A curvature threshold. So this is basically these threshold values here are basically saying these have to be true in order to make splash. So this curvature threshold, I'm pretty sure this is a normalized value. Yes, it is. So we'll just go to 1. If it's up to 1, the higher the number, the less particles you're going to be getting. So you want to have this kind of low to, you can have it very tight like this, but you won't hardly get any particles at all. So the higher the value is basically saying it's going to say less particles because of the curve of the fluid here, the splash. Go ahead and unhide, and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to make a layer 2 for the splash and foam because it's going to be kind of in the way here. And also here you can also see the position variation, how this is affected through here. And this is not what we want. And also, so this curve here, again, in order to make this look right, we can make the curve tighter, so we won't get any splash here. So let's say 0.35 for this might work, and that's good. So I'm gonna go ahead and also make a layer. So splash foam. Okay, let's go and turn that off for now. I'll turn off this guy and turn our foam back on. Alrighty. So also we can I'll do the speed threshold too. Basically what this is saying, the particles have to be going a certain speed in order to make splash, which is very useful. In fact, I'm going to unhide this hip flip again here and show you. Now if we come into our domain, and this is where this data stuff starts to become more useful. If you go to automatic range, go to yes, we can see that the fastest particle here is 19. So let's say we want to use this. So let's say the particles must be going, I don't know, like 2, let's say a 3 or something, in order to make splash. And this is a good way to limiting the particles and controlling the look of it as well. Vorticity threshold, if we were calculating vorticity, I believe, we would use this. Yeah, so we'd have to activate this guy here. It is under particle channels. If we turn this on, then we could then use it. And this is actually, it's pretty cool. I mean, you can then have a little bit more splash in the vorticity areas, but we don't need to do that for this. So come back in here. Neighbors threshold. So basically saying there needs to be 2 or more particles in order to make splashes. And this is pretty good for what we're doing here. 2 is good. You don't want 1. You can say 3 if you want. You'll get less particles the more this number is. So it needs to have more than 3 neighbors now in order to make a splash. Position variation, we went over. Angle variation, you get more of an angle here when this sims out. So 15 is always nice. Velocity variation, this is a nice one too. I'll always put this either 0.5. Secondary splash, this is if we want to make more splash particles, we can. This will increase the sim time, of course, and all that, but we won't. We'll probably hit this in a minute, but we won't right now. So with everything, with this, just the splash, we're not messing with the foam stuff yet. And though it is making foam, but we won't go into that just yet. Let's go ahead and sim this out and see exactly what we get. So then we'll go ahead and hide our flip again here. Show foam. Simulate this guy and pause this, and I'll return. All right, so we have about 400,000 particles here. So let's go ahead and stop this and populate it up. About 60 frames of it, and have a look. Yeah, so we're getting a really nice look to this now. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and go back here. And so what I'm going to do here now, which is pretty useful, we'll go ahead and make a preview here. Go to Playback, go to OpenGL Preview. And I'll just make this preview for us. You get to see this. Let's see here. If we had a higher res base sim, this would be a lot nicer as well. But this is pretty good for a pretty low res sim. And we can make this. We can make way more particles too if we want to. What I'm probably going to do is turn down the position variation on this. Okay, let's go ahead and just escape here. Press escape and it will launch into player mode here. It should. Wait, not. There it goes. It's a little bit slow. So that's pretty cool. So you can see it come up, do its thing. We're still getting this like thing in the very beginning here on top of the surface, which is I'm going to go ahead and try to fix this little guy here. It's looking pretty sweet though. So let's go up to curvature threshold and let's make this like just for fun, let's put this 0.5. We get a lot less particles now. So I'm going to just change this to 120 and just kind of see what we get real quick. Again, I'm going to go in here, reset it, sim it, and also a fun little quick tidbit about this: when you do command line sim, it'll actually save your file for you every time you do that. So that's kind of nice to know. So you see how fast this is already going. So I'm going to pause it though for a couple minutes, and I'll return. Alrighty. So we went ahead and simmed out some of these splash particles of foam. Let's see here what we get. Alright, so I did quite a few here. I think I did about 150 frames. So we get, yeah, so we're getting a lot more. It's a little chunky looking. It's fine. We'll go ahead and turn on our flip here as well, so we can get more of an indication of what this stuff is doing. Now the foam particles, and we'll go into the settings here in a second. Essentially what's happening here at the foam is the splashes falling and hitting and making foam, and also with the turbulence involved, it makes this foam here. And unfortunately we can't color these particles something different separately, since it's in the same emitter here, splash foam. We can change it in here. Like you can see it's all white right now, but we'd have to do it separately in order for that to work. So let's go ahead and I'm gonna just make a quick playback to look at some of these frames here in a second. But I want to get this, see if this one thing got fixed in the beginning, what we were talking about here. Yeah, let's see here. And this is okay when we get this right here, but we just want to kind of get rid of those first few frames. It's still kind of happening. We're just gonna have to make that threshold tighter on there. I'm gonna do some more adjusting anyways, and I'll resend this as well, but let's go ahead and just do a quick preview right here. I'll go ahead and just pause this real quick as well, so you don't have to watch this being made. And so yeah. Okay, so here we got this guy playing back. It's not playing back in real time, it's cached up here, but it's looking pretty cool. We're going to go ahead and fix some of the foam settings as well. I'll show you what some of the foam settings do. But yeah, it's looking good enough. And also to keep in mind too, I mean, this looks like a lot of particles, but it's not really. And once we render, we're not going to be rendering this in this class, but if we were to render this, it's easy to control the density of this stuff. Like if you were to show this to a supervisor, they're like, "Oh, it's just too much stuff," you know. But once it's rendered and once it's dealt with correctly, you know, it looks a lot better than just this white mess, you know, because it's just stacking, this color stacking on top of each other here, and so you're getting this like thick, opaque look to it when it's really not. So okay, go ahead and close this guy. Let's go back to our splash foam. Let's go to some of this foam dynamics as well, and we didn't actually cover the lifetime of the splash particles either. Foam creation, this radius threshold, basically, this is basically saying here that the foam particles are generated from the splashes, and this determines the minimum radius for the splash particle to produce foam. So once these dudes hit the surface, this is basically saying what radius will take advantage of this. So right now, since it's a threshold, it's 0, so that means it's gonna be made no matter what. So you can control the amount of foam with this here. Basically, the higher the number, the less foam you're gonna get. I usually don't mess with this unless there's just too much foam, or you know, whatnot. But most of the time, you know, it's not a real issue. And also in production too, it'd probably be better practice to use a splash and a foam in here, and I'll show you that perhaps here at the end of this chapter. But just because you can break out the particle sequences at that point, you'll have a splash sequence and a foam sequence, so you'll have a little bit more control about what and how it's being used. But just for this purposes of this class here, just using this for now, it's totally fine. But I will kind of let you guys look at it before this one's over. Min and max lifetime, again, this is 60 frames, so exactly at 60 frames, this stuff is going to be killed off. This too is kind of to taste. You know, if you want the splashes to die quicker, you can certainly do it like this. I'll just leave it at 60 for now. I kind of like what we were getting with the look. So let's go down to this foam dynamic. So surface offset. So this is kind of nice. What this does is it offsets the foam to the surface of the fluid field, right? So, and it's in world units. So, for instance, why would you want to use this? Well, once we start meshing, the foam may not be right on top of the mesh. So you can actually offset it like this here. So it'll be above the surface. I don't know if you can go negative. Let's see. Yeah, you can't. So it's only positive values. This is 0 though. So yeah, that's what it usually is used for. So you can then have this the foam kind of floating on the surface for that. The stringiness here makes it like well, let's see if I can show you an example here. This guy load up. But essentially, you get these like nice little stringy bits, and through here, yeah, you can kind of see here where it's almost like they're getting caught in the velocity fields. Get these nice stringy looks to it, and you know, foam does have that nice stringy look, and this defaults to 1. And I believe this is like a normalized value as well. Yeah, so the less smallest number is, the more or less the stringiness kind of effect is going to happen. And it's kind of nice to have, though. It looks really nice. Foam in a max lifetime. This all kind of vary, you know, all to like 35 to 60. So you get some like, so the foam's kind of dying off, you know, a little bit. Not so poppy. Min and max friction. So basically, this is the friction in which the foam is gliding across the surface of the fluid. And if you're looked at foam doesn't necessarily stick onto the surface. It's kind of integrated in a way, but it kind of flows along it. So this is basically saying at 1 and 0.8. So there's a really high friction, so the foam actually kind of sticks in place where it's at, and it just moves just a little bit, you know. And this is kind of nice to have that kind of control in there for that. So it picks a random value between these two and does it. Let's see here, and that's about it really. We don't have to really, there's not too many other things for the foam. The foam is mainly reliant on the splash particles, so that's kind of good to know. And in fact, let's go ahead and let's mess with this raised threshold and make some, like, I don't know, just like the 0.2. We could go ahead and send this and stuff. I'm going to do a couple more. Let's see. Let's look up here and see if we want to do anything different. The count is good. Oh yeah, we want to change this 0.6 and speed threshold. Let's go ahead and let's look at the domain again here. So 29. So 29. The fastest particle is 29. So let's go back. Let's just say 5 for now. And neighbor threshold value 3 is okay. Position variation. Let's get the 0.1 for again. We get a little less particles, so we'll go ahead and add some up here to that to kind of mess with that, kind of balance it out essentially. So okay, I think it's pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and do a few frames here just to see if this part is fixed, and then we'll probably just go ahead and move on to some of the meshing parameters. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause this and let this sim out. So I'm gonna sim this guy. Okay, so let's go ahead and we got some more frames here. Yeah, so settings didn't work out the way we wanted them to. The curvature threshold is too high for this to work out. We could kind of compensate this with position variation, but you know, we don't really want to do that too much. We'll go ahead and change this back and redo that, but you kind of see now these settings are kind of touchy too, so let's go ahead and put a little 0.35 in there, and curvature threshold, let's put this back to 0.5, and speed threshold, we'll put this to 4, position variation, we'll put this to 0.12, and this also, this radius threshold, so 0.1 for now, so that way, let's turn this to 0. We don't, let's make the foam happen no matter what on these guys. So okay, we'll go ahead and do that. So let's check some other stuff here. Yeah, I think everything is fine. I mean, we could mess with the surface offset, but we really don't know until we start meshing it. We probably won't really mess with it too much, since this class isn't that super long and I can't really go into a ton of depth with this stuff. But you kind of get the general idea here with this. But I'll go ahead and resend this out, show you again just when the settings are changed, and then we'll go ahead and move on to some meshing here. So we can go ahead and oops, we want to reset this. Also, just really quickly, if you come down here, you got this new command line options. You could do same as scene arguments. We could reset it once we do it instead of doing that every time. We could use the cache, or we can mesh, which is really cool, which we'll be doing here for the next one. But we'll just put none for now. Threads, same as scene, or you can specify. Range, again, you can either specify or same as scene. So go ahead and do this. Save, right? And also a shortcut for simulating, something to know. I'm so used to pressing sim though. I'll go ahead and pause this here, and I'll be back. Alright, so we got about 83 frames here. Let's go ahead and see here. Let's see back one. Looks like we yeah, this is fine. This is good enough for what we really want. You kind of get to see some of that detail and stuff like that. Let's go ahead and just thinking here. There we go. You know, we could probably add more into it if you want. Again, too, a lot of stuff we really wouldn't see in the render. A lot of these like little particles here by themselves, we wouldn't see. But this gives us a good idea of what we need to mess with. You know, again, too, this is a totally separate pass that we'd be rendering out separately, just points more than likely in our renderer. Just a quick note too before we move on to the next chapter. Um, Probably wondering where these particles are going. If you use Realflow, you probably know where all this data is going at. But I will show you real quickly. Come up here and press F12. This will open the Export Central, and this just shows you what's being cached out and whatnot. We have different options to do this. We have our Open VDB now, which is new in this new version. We also have Olympic, good old-fashioned bin files, and our RPC, which is being cached out. A lot of times I'll cache out the bin files as well, but for this domain, since we're not really doing much with it except meshing it in here, if we were meshing it in an external system like Frost or something like that, in Max, we would probably turn that on, or turn on the Krakatoa here as well. But you got to keep in mind at that point that this stuff is then being doubled up in size on your drive. So this stuff is really big. It can get really, really big. The splash and foam, it just gets the bin files by default. So, and where is this going? So come over here, we have this global directory or global variable here, the scene dir. This is basically saying it's going into our project folder, which is, I think it lets you do it over here. That's the open folder. Click on this open folder. It's not working. Let's see here. Open. Nope. All right. There we go. Okay. Open up on this other screen. So yeah, as you can see here, tentacle particles, and we have all this stuff here. Kind of see the size. They're pretty big, and this is a low res type of thing. You know, 100 megs for that for those guys here. So if we come up here, go to particles, just right click on it and go to properties. Computer's being a little bit slow right now. Should give us the size. There it goes. Yeah, it's 24 gigs. I mean, that's for a small thing here. But yeah, so it's just kind of keep in mind file size. You have to be really efficient on what you need, what you know you need in the beginning of a project and all that. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And you can find all the other stuff, what's being exported into here. You know, like we're going to go into meshes here next, and we'll show you that as well, this Hybrido meshes. So let's go ahead and get to the meshing of this.